My name is Matt Weiner. I would, if you want, I would just be happy to like field some questions, or if people have stuff about bass. Does anyone have a question or something they were thinking of?
Yeah, I do. I always I have several bands that I run in Reno and Nevada, and I my bass player gets on me when I change turnarounds between phrasings, and I'm always wondering why that is. And I suspect that it's one of the things I'm not so clear about in bass player, but bass playing. But I assume that you're playing the notes within the chord, like within the triad, so that if I step out of that range, for example, if I don't play the expected turnaround, then he sometimes gets off, and we go in contrary to each other. Just wondering if that happens to you a lot, or do you find that happening?
Okay.
I know it's easier when everybody's on a scripted page, but when you're doing like freeform,
I have to start by saying I'm not a counselor or a psychiatrist, so I can't. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Then you couldn't help my band if you wanted.
Okay.
But you counsel trombone players.
Okay. We're not.
Everybody does that.
We're not
He's
gonna.
actually an old
There's no
trombone.
trombone or tenor banjo jokes allowed in my class.
I want some to take home with
Yeah,
me.
okay. So here, so just to be clear, when you say a turnaround, you're saying you play a tune, you get to the end of the form,
Right.
and you might play.
You might go from minor seven to a seventh to back to the root chord or something. But
just let me, and so just because I want, and so you're saying like you play a tune, which like there's a chord chart, everyone's playing, but then there's like the turnaround at the end where you're going back to the top. You might have a number of different things that you would do.
Right. So you'll have like say a two measures, and you got to fill them somehow. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Especially if you're playing, with a small group like 3 or 4 people. You're trying to fill it in with something, and depending on what I fill it into, it depends on the ire I get from my bass player.
Okay, I mean, I guess like I said, I don't feel like this is a bass specific question, but I'll give you an example. If I played a blues, this is going to be a blues in C, so a 12-bar form. I'm just making something up. Then it goes up to the 4 chord, which is the F. Then it goes to the 5 chord, which is the G. Here comes a turnaround. Then I make a, and now we're at the top. Now let's say we did that whole thing and I got to the 5 chord again. Here it comes again. 1, 6, 2, 5. There's like any number of things I could play, and there's any number of things that you could play.
Right.
And my answer to that question is, if I guess your band is of a certain size, so no one's complaining but him or her. So I guess it's just kind of thing for me when I'm playing in a band. I just listen. Like for example, if it's a chart and it's written out, I'm going to try to play what's written on the chart. So this is one suggestion. You might write
it out.
The turnaround on the chart. If you want to do 2 turnarounds, 2 different ones, you might write 2 turnarounds and say, "Hey, I'll pick one of these 2. Just listen up." And I just think it's an opportunity for, in sort of an improvising environment, for a band to like figure out how they can signal that kind of stuff to each other. Because certainly I play tunes all the time. I mean, that's what I'll be doing in every concert.
Right.
I don't know how they're going to turn this stuff around.
Right.
Other side of the coin is, well, you should be listening to the rest of the band too.
Right.
And maybe your turnaround. I don't know. I don't want to pick on your bass player, but it sort of seems like being a little bit picky about it. But I don't know them, so I don't want to like cause
That's
it.
okay.
Cause a fight.
Yeah.
How are you tuned? Are you like in fifths or?
Good question. The bass is tuned in fourths.
Fourths.
Okay.
E, A, D, G. It's the exact same thing as the first 4 strings on a guitar, 6-string guitar.
Yeah.
And electric basses are tuned the same way. These different little basses have smaller scales, but they tune at E, A, D, G. which made me always wonder, what if they tuned it a little bit differently so they didn't have to like get that low D there. But anyways, EADG, and it.
How do you manage pitch? Oh, sorry, that was my last question.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
I mainly play Irish music, and of course, bass is not particularly part of that.
No.
How would it be used if you were trying to get that into Irish music?
That's a great question, and what I would do, I'm going to defer, because if there's any genre of music that I know very little about, although I love it, it's Irish music. And so, generally, but there are some great bass players in Irish music, and I feel like that band Lunasa,
I've seen them perform.
has a
several
great
times.
bass player.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to them in several years, but I sort of remember going, "Whoa, good bass playing."
Okay.
And then the other thing is, I don't know what groups he plays with, but there's a guy named Jason Cipher,
Okay.
who's a bass player from New York that I didn't even connect with till I left New York. But then we sort of had like an internet friendship. He loves Irish music,
Okay.
and he plays it really great.
Okay.
So I would go online, look for Jason Cipher,
Jason Cipher. Okay.
and then watch what he's doing. It's not a lot of videos of him playing with Irish bands, but he sort of thinks about it a lot, and also there are some things of him doing duos with various musicians and stuff.
Okay.
And also playing Irish tunes like the melody with the bow and stuff like that. A brilliant musician.
That sounds incredibly hard.
Yeah. Any other questions? You had a question that you asked.
Oh, how do you keep pitch? Like, I mean, because it's fretless. So
A good question, and here's. So this is good, because when I teach my students, one of the first things we do is that's the main question, and one of the first things we do is try to come up with a system for figuring out where these darn notes are. Right?
Mhm.
It's hard.
Right.
I mean, and it's even hard on a fretted instrument to just know your fingerboard and know where the notes are. You know, it's like if you've been playing for a while, you're just like, oh, I always know where there's a G here and there's a G here, but
Right.
it's always. So let me show you an exercise. You guys can try it while I'm doing it, and it's an exercise that is a combination of a bunch of exercises. This is a good tangent. I love tangents. So maybe, are you familiar with the vomit exercise?
No.
Okay, lucky you. There's an exercise that classical bass players. It's called the vomit exercise.
The vomit?
Yeah, and I can't, and no one will say really whether it's because it sounds like vomit or causes you to vomit. But basically it goes something like this.
I'm very genteel, so that would not appeal to me.
Okay, you do seem like a delicate flower. That even the slightest bit of breeze coming through just okay. So this is how the vomit exercise looks. I'm going to show you the vomit exercise. I'm going to explain it, and then I will show you my exercise, which I find much better. But you'll see once you know the general idea of it, you can kind of make up your own. So this is kind of how it looks. How are you guys feeling? Roughly. And then, so what I'm doing there is I'm playing a major scale. I didn't do a good job of it. In A flat, because that's sort of the lowest note that you. And I'm just going up to the second degree of the scale. Oops, sorry. Coming down. Then I go into the third degree of scale. Coming down. Going up to the fourth degree. Coming down. Going up to the fifth degree. Coming down. Does that make sense? And the classical bass players do it on every string. They start on other notes. They do any number of combination things. You could just do arpeggios. So you're going from on the A flat, you're going A flat to C, A flat to E flat, And that's how, and you're always just kind of using one finger, and any finger for these extra, because you're not really trying to learn this kind of fancy stuff. Like you said, you're trying to learn where the notes are by ear. And so that being said, here's the exercise I came up with. What I do is, and what I teach my students is, first thing first, a lot of them is we find this A on the G string. And we find it, if we find it by checking it with the D, the open D. And you can do this on your bass too. And you're listening for this fifth to be perfectly tuned. And it doesn't matter if you can, you might not know it. I always just go experiment, move it around a bit, see. Find it. Then you find the D on the G string and you test it with the D. And then once you have an idea of where the A and the D are, I have a little pattern I came up with, and it looks like this. I'm going A, D, A, D, 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 down to. And the rhythm is like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what's happening is, I'm doing a couple things. I'm trying to hear this D, A in tune with the D. I'm trying to hear this D in tune with the D. Then I'm sliding between them in time to sort of teach my body and where that note is. And, you know, you do it once, it's really hard, doesn't sound very good. You do it 10 times maybe. You do it 20,000 times. And just like anything you're learning on an instrument, it's hard to imagine the point where you weren't very good at it 20,000 times ago. And so I'm shortening this up, but if you want, you guys can give me your email and I can send you a notated thing. And I think I do this exercise on my electric bass because it helps teach me where the notes are going up the neck. So even though the intonation isn't as important, it's the rhythm of moving from one note to practicing moving around the neck in rhythm, because that's what you're going to do when you play. Unless your band doesn't play in any kind of rhythm. So then the next one I do is I find this A, but I check it with the A, open A. And you know, your open strings can never be out of tune unless you haven't tuned. So you're checking, and now I'm making an octave. And then I slide up to a C sharp. And a C sharp is a third of A. So when you check it with a low A, you're making a 10th, third, it doesn't matter. It kind of has a nice sound, right? So now you can practice this. And I'm going very fast because we want to get to some other stuff. And then you can mix it. You can mix it with the other one. So you can do the D. And then when you get down here again, go to the A. And only go up to the C sharp. And then go back to the D. Now we're hitting the low A and only going up to the C sharp. So I'm hitting this note, the D, C sharp and the D, in this, I'm going from here to here in the same tempo, same rhythm. So obviously I can't tell you how, but my hand is moving a little bit slower to get there because I have to cover slightly less distance. Do this a bunch of times and you start to sort of learn, your body sort of gets trained where these notes are. And then, you know, I have a whole thing. So I go this way. This would be the third lesson. Maybe the fifth lesson. Then I do this low E. Excuse me. Back to this open A, hit the C sharp. Then do the A. And I could be doing it much slower, I'm just trying to get through it for you guys. Then do this G sharp and B on the, and so on and so forth. And it kind of is actually, I love this exercise. I'm proud of this exercise because it actually is sort of musical. It's kind of meditative. I enjoy doing it. And then you're saying, well, but there's so many notes. But look at what I've already done. If I can find this note, D, I can find this A, this E, and this B. If I can find this C sharp, or I usually play jazz, so this to me is usually a D flat. I can find this A flat, this E flat, so on forth. So I got those two notes. Then I find this B, F sharp, C sharp, I could D flat, G sharp. And then I find this G sharp, I kind of know where these are. So I already know my body is trained to find all those notes. The only one that I haven't played really is this B flat and this C. And I won't go into, I just have another version of the exercise that does that. But that is in as fast as I could do it, and hopefully it was kind of clear, how I practice my intonation. And I think it's important to mention, sure, as a fretless fellow bass player, you know, the intonation is not something you learn sitting in a class, just like anything in music. You learn it by doing. It improves by doing, and you never get it. It's a lifelong journey. No classical musician, especially bass player, is like, I did it. I practiced all my vomit exercise for 7 years, and now my intonation is perfect, and now I don't have to do it anymore. It's a constant journey. The more you practice, the more refined it gets, the better it gets. If you don't practice for a while, as you saw when I first tried doing that A flat scale, it gets worse. And so it's sort of, you know, I tell my students, like, that exercise and a lot of the beginning exercise shows are things that when I'm practicing, I try to do them a little bit every day. They're not beginner exercises and I'm sure in all your respective instruments it's the same thing. They're not beginner exercises that you learn once and then you move on to harder exercises because they're done. They're just like lifelong foundation or like staple foods. You know, it's not like you eat carrots and you're like, I got it. I ate all the beta carotene for my whole life. I'm moving on to cake and cookies. You know, it's like, no, it's something you have to keep doing. Exercise is the same way.
It's muscle memory, really, right?
And you're matching others that you're playing with.
Yes.
So, you know, depending on who you're with and what you're playing.
That is a great point. And that
if you're listening to each other, then you can, nod to each other, yes, or try this.
Exactly. And intonation or just pitch is not a fixed thing. Those of us, I mean, I play fretted instruments, or a piano is like the closest approximation they can get so that you can play in all the 12 keys. This is beyond the scope of this bass class. I'm not going to teach this, but like this kind of intonation thing. But basically, when you listen to the finest string quartets and orchestras, their intonation is changing. They might play they might play a C sharp if they're kind of in the key of A. They play it one way, but let's say they're modulating to the key of D. When they play a C sharp again, they might sharpen that C sharp a little bit to sort of like push it towards that D that they're moving to, because the intonation is not something that is just regular and final. I mean, actually, guitar players know this from tuning their guitar. Not so much on a 4-string and 5th, but if you're tuning a 6-string, why do you tune that guitar and then it's in tune one chord? And then that darn B string, you play another chord and it's a little bit out of tune. You have to somehow like split the difference, you know.
This will translate pretty well onto this instrument.
There you go. That looks like a fretless 5-string banjo. But yeah, and that would be another thing. It's like, I don't know if you have fret markers or anything on that.
No, I don't. I played fiddle before I picked this up, so I had some intonation, but that will help. That exercise should help me with intonation on this.
What else are people thinking?
Beautiful.
So are you actually, when you're playing, are you able to accommodate an instrument that's out of tune that you're playing with? Like, I mean, do you ever do that? You just do it by feel? Because, I mean, I could see how that could happen when you're playing. If you get to a certain level, you're probably playing and then you kind of, think, geez, there's something there in that chord, and it's just not quite right, but you kind of make it right, or at least you can match it, you know. Even
Yeah, a
though-
little bit.
Yeah, a
You
little
know,
bit.
it just depends. I mean, sometimes,
You probably don't notice that.
sometimes I think as you become more aware of pitch, and I should say this, that I don't have perfect pitch.
Right.
My relative pitch is just okay. You know, I don't have some like magical ears, just what I've sort of learned from playing music, you know, ability to recognize chord progressions and stuff like that and things. But I think sometimes, yes, I do fix things. And so, especially for me, like I just think of something I might be playing with people and like, I realize like very quickly, like when I play an open string, it doesn't sound very good. But when I'm playing the rest of the string, when I'm playing any fretted note, it sounds fine, sounds in tune. Probably I'm just a little bit out of tune with someone, or that
Yeah.
string's out of tune.
As
But
long as you're in fourth, you're good.
but when I'm actually fingering a note, I just kind of fix it automatically. It's not
Yeah.
something,
Right.
you know, if something's egregiously out of tune.
Yeah, masks have come in handy too, so you don't make a facial expression.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. This I'm not trying to make fun of the pandemic, but one of the things about having a mask on is it's great because I can just be as grumpy as I want.
Right.
You know.
Oh, that doesn't stop
And-
lots of Irish players.
Okay, yeah,
Grumpy
okay.
anyway.
Well, I'm grumpy, but it's just I can be as grumpy as I want. And no one says, "Hey, smile." What else are people thinking?
Just technical end of it, as far as the bridge, yours has some adjustment to it.
Yes.
This is a new bridge that was put on because the other one bent.
Ben, yeah.
But is it nice to have that adjustable?
This is a good question. So here's the thing. Just like many, some guitar. I mean, my tenor,
shops, yeah.
my tenor guitar, my art shop has an little adjustable bridge. This has these bridge adjusters, and any bass. I've never had a bass without them. I fiddle with them. I probably shouldn't, but I actually like go, oh God, it's too low, it's too high, and it's comparatively stupid on my part. But I think it's helpful because it's hard for me to believe. Well, for example, I played your bass. I love the sound of it, but for me, the action is a little too low.
Yes. And
You think
that's
it's too
what
low for you?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I've started to experience. You
So
know,
one of the things
because
is
I guess it wears over time, right?
it's
little
a
bit.
little bit. I mean, there's probably settling, but also weather changes. Even with
Right.
plywood, this is plywood, and even with plywood bases, things change when the weather changes, and you notice it.
Yeah.
You know, you're playing and you're just like, things are a little different. But so like when I adjust this, mine has, I don't know if you can see the top, it's got two little, which are great because otherwise you
That's
adjust
your-
it and
that's
you can
your
know
adjustment.
how far you turn one so you can turn the other one the same. But I'll just like I'll like loosen the strings a little bit, not a lot, just to, if I'm gonna lower it I won't, but if I'm gonna raise it, I'll loosen the strings a little bit and then just give it a tiny little nudge and see what
Does it have a
happens.
truss rod?
Yeah.
Does it have a truss rod there?
A truss rod in the neck, no.
So you don't
It's-
need it, but it's pretty thick, right? So you,
But what it does have, there's a bass bar.
There's
Like
inside,
there's
right?
like a sound post. There's a
Yeah.
bass bar excuse me. There's a couple things. There's a bass bar which is glued to the top. So down the middle, I think like right,
Underneath the low string.
yeah, right there, right there. There's like a big piece of wood, and then over here is a sound post, which is something that goes between the two, the top and the bottom, and you know like mine. There's a little pencil mark around it.
and the sound posts keep it from flexing too much.
It keeps it from collapsing, but it's really just how the bass makes sound. It's the sound post is like a huge indicator on any string instrument that has one. A huge indicator of tone
Okay.
and where it's placed,
Yeah.
and if it gets bumped. And people, you know, I'm not too particular, but people are pretty particular about where it is. And you know, my instrument doesn't sound good. I have to have a new sound post fitted, and you can't just move it around because it's literally fitted to the top and the bottom. So if it went a little this way or a little that way, you know, the bass, it's going to be higher or lower. It's not two flat surfaces either. So
one of the nightmares on a fiddle is the sound post falling over.
Yeah, try it on a bass. It's a nightmare.
So how are they
That's-
attached?
That's what happens.
They're not attached.
Pressure.
It's just by pressure.
Yes.
Ah.
But it's just by pressure, which means that, like for example, I can take this bass apart. It's got a
Oh, you
screw
can.
on the top, so I can lie it down, and then take down the strings, unscrew this, and the neck comes off for travel. But in order to do that, I actually have a big pad with a strap. I have to strap down the top.
Oh, I see.
It goes around to keep the
pressure
sound post
tension,
from falling.
Right.
Because then it stands back up again and it goes in a plane and gets thrown all over. And actually, I've taken it out and the sound post has been down, and I travel with tools to put it back up. And it's one of those things where there's I have a mirror so I can see where it goes on the top. And there's a little notch on the post so I can see what's supposed to be facing out. And it's surprisingly easy. The only difference is I watch my luthier do it, and it takes her about 45 seconds, and it took me 25 minutes.
But other than that, it's fine.
And
Yeah.
when we live here and something goes wrong, there is no luthier.
Yeah.
So
I know
you
that.
have to travel,
Yeah, where do you go to
And there's
Portland?
one-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Portland.
And then I found one in Forest Grove.
Oh, there is one in Forest
Yes,
Grove, okay.
I got a name for that, so. But that's, that's
Still,
an issue.
yeah.
Because stuff doesn't happen when you want it to,
Yeah,
necessarily.
The change in humidity around here probably doesn't help the instruments stay stable.
No, as far as our,
Coming off the ocean, yeah.
yes.
Cool.
But I thought that might be my next step then, because you can hear that, it's too close. And-
Yeah, I mean, for me, the bass sounded fine to me. I am so used to this. Here's some other interesting
The
things
depth,
about my bass.
right.
I'm using gut strings. So these are, these were made, well, this one's an old one. At this point, they mix and match, but they're made of actual, sheep intestines. And you probably know all about gut strings. There's, that's all strings used to be gut strings.
Right.
They started making steel strings for other instruments, and bass kind of switched over in the 50s or I think really the 60s.
Is there equivalent of a NiGut for that or not?
Yeah, and they have all sorts of gut emulating strings, nylon strings or wraps. And then on the top two, I'm using a synthetic string wrapped in steel. I have another bass that has metal wrapped guts, but they're very finicky. So I like using that when I don't have to worry so much about being in tune immediately for the whole thing. Like for example at the concert tonight. But I just like the feel of them and the sound of them, and really just all the music I've listened to, as I got into playing bass and listening to music, I just am fascinated with the sound. It just, I discovered that all these bass players I listened to, mostly from a long time ago, used gut strings, and I was like, oh, that's the sound I like. So I just started using them.
That's a small fortune.
And well, this is what I found about the gut strings. I actually spend more on these two than I do on these, because if you have quality gut strings and you get your nut and bridge notches done right, so it's not catching, these things last forever. Whereas these wear out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, a tenor, how
You get a little burr on it.
Yeah, when you play like a guitar player who plays a lot, their strings are $7 or $8.
Right.
But they might change them every month or so, right?
6 months,
Yeah, or even every 6 months. This string, I don't remember. I would say each string was at least $100, but they're 5 years old. So it's I don't know, it's a little bit more.
I've noticed that with a higher tone, the easier you can hear changes and pitches as they get lower. It's harder. For me, probably not for you, but for me, it's harder to notice when something doesn't sound quite right. Because there's a little bit more flexibility in lower tones than there are in higher tones. It can be really dead on in higher tones. So guitars, when you play them enough, they start to sound off, and you can't get. And then eventually they just won't tune. Where these guys probably have a lot more leeway.
Yeah, well,
to
definitely.
forgiveness in that, right?
As far as pitch goes, there's definitely it's hard to tune really low. It's hard to hear low pitches.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tune my tenor guitar kind of to itself,
Right.
and I can do that with my bass when it's quiet. But if I'm at a gig where there's any noise, I have a hard time tuning that, and that's just I've been doing it for years, and I really do. So I'm happy to have an electronic tuner to
Yeah,
help me.
absolutely.
Do you
But
need
I think with guitar strings, I think it's actually getting notches in it, and all these different things are happening,
Yeah.
so that when the string gets a little dent in it, and then you're pushing down on it, you're actually not getting, the same way when you just push strings down too hard on a guitar, you can change the pitch of it.
Can you use standard tuners for that, or do you need a different tuner for
Just-
tuning that low?
A regular old tuner is good.
Okay, we'll pick it up.
It's just hard to hear E.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
hold that
the
low,
lowest,
it's
the
just-
lowest
yes.
note is hard. That's the hardest string.
I can imagine good deal of that.
And I
Jelly
haven't,
rubber.
I haven't transitioned to an electronic tuner, which I need to
wow.
also do, too. I still have the,
That sure is nice when there's a bunch of guys making noise around you because
Yeah.
you
You can't
can't
do
hear
it.
a thing, and it's like, yeah. But the bass, I've noticed, interestingly enough, if you have a bass guy who's flopping around in the background, and you have an electronic tuner, it'll affect the tuner sometimes. It picks up, the tuner will pick up on it just because the sound has got so much vibration, moving so much air. It's interesting.
and Matt, we try not to be obnoxious, too, right?
Oh, we try.
Yes.
We probably don't succeed very often. Here, let me show, just for the bass players, and I think this is useful. Actually, I tried doing this. I had during the pandemic, I was doing this a little bit on the tenor guitar. But here's an exercise that I like. And then again, once you can do it, you can make up your own permutations of it. And it's an arpeggio exercise. So like you might learn, does everyone know what an arpeggio is? Hopefully close enough. It's basically a chord. Let's say a major chord is 1, 3, and 5 of the scale. So for C, it's C, E, and G. You play them together, you play a chord. You play that chord one note at a time, and they call it arpeggiating the chord. So someone say, oh, you have to practice your arpeggios, every key, something someone says. And so I'll be like, someone's like, you play C, practice your G, practice your F, maybe practice them in two directions. I'm going to switch keys because it'll demonstrate my exercise better. Actually, I'll just do scales. The same thing. Forget arpeggios. Just scales. So here's the thing. Here's your C scale. Even if you don't know how to play one, it sounds like a major scale. And even if you don't know what a major scale is, it sounds like that thing that people practice, right? And then someone says, oh, you got to practice also your A flat major scale. Or no, you have to practice your D major scale too. So you go. So I learned from a great jazz bass player who lives in New York City, but originally from Portland. He's even older than me. He taught me, I took lessons with him years and years ago. He just said, when you practice your scales or your arpeggios or whatever patterns you're working, it doesn't matter, are your like sounds that you're going to use. And you don't, the trap is to practice it from root to root, because you always practice it in the same spot, in the same spots, and then you don't really learn where they are on your bass. So here's what he taught me. He said, when you practice C, don't practice it like this. Practice it from the lowest note that you can possibly play it up into some spot. And like for our sake, let's say we're going to practice. Every scale will either start on E or F. And every scale will end on E or F. So when you practice a C major scale, you practice it like this. doesn't matter your instrument. But what I did is instead I learned the C major scale. I just played the C major scale over this range. So when you play a D major scale, you're going to practice it over the same range. So instead of going and then going down, you're going to do this. So both the C major scale and the and the D major scale, both in my exercise, they both contain an E natural, the lowest note. So in that case, they both. If I did a D flat major scale, instead of going like this, that was a terrible fingering. I would start on the F. Screwed it up. Obviously, I should be practicing. And so this bass player, he said, do that for all 12 keys, and learn just practice your scales from either E or F to E or F. And then, in his thing, he was like, then switch. Don't stop in between. Maybe go up, C, come down, and then do D flat, come down, up and down. And you're always practicing over the same range. Does that make sense, what I'm describing? So you could do that on a tenor guitar. You just start on, let's say we're in CGDA tuning. You'd start everything on either C or C sharp. So your C major scale would start there right on the root. But when you did a F major scale, you would start on that C, but that would be like the 5th degree of the F. And so you're learning the different scales over the same space of the guitar.
Your canvas.
What was that?
Oh, your canvas, the same space.
Yeah.
Canvas, yeah.
So you're not learning from root to root. So everything's kind of moved in the same thing. And it's like, on one hand, it's like, well, what does it do? The main thing I think it does is get you out of a rut of practicing scales the same way. If scales are your thing. See, I actually practice. Here's. That's E. How about D would be? F. D flat. Always ending up down there, And I mean, you just say, I don't want to do that range. I want to start every scale somewhere else on the instrument.
Would you do that through different positions? I'm talking like violin positions.
Well, you could. That would be an interesting, and I think that makes more sense on a guitar too, where you're generally playing. You spend a lot of time playing horizontally.
Right.
And some bass players do play like that. I kind of play like this. I play like this across the top here until I get to this string. Then I start going up. I don't play a lot in here.
Okay.
That's maybe because I'm not like super trained classical guy, some guys do. But I kind of play across this way, and then when I get here, I go up. And I do use the other strings when I need them, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay.
But that's like an interesting thing you could do with the instrument. Just go, okay, I want to play, I don't know, might as well start doing this. Start here, like this is an E. So go E. That was a C scale starting on this E going across. You saw I didn't do it very well because I never practiced it. But I think any stringed instrument works that way, to think about stuff in like a range of stuff rather than every time you're playing a C scale, then when you move to a D, you just shift over one.
So I guess one of the things that's confusing to me about bass, just in general, is, so if you're reading, I assume that you read fake music, right? You're in a band, they pull out a fake sheet and hand it to you, right? So you're really reading the chords, right? So do you care? For example, let's say you have a C and it goes to a C diminished. are you actually formulating that chord in your mind, saying, "Oh, the diminished is I've got to play." I mean, you're changing the way that chord structure or the note you're playing based on that, or does it not really matter to you? Is it the fact that it's a root C makes? I'm always confused about that in bass. Like, is it an A, or if you have an A minor, does it matter?
It could matter. It's a great question.
Yeah.
And so let me just explain for people who don't know. Sorry if you do know I'm repeating. When he says like a fake book or fake music, he's referring to like a chord chart or a lead sheet. So instead of the whole score being written out and your music that you get is your part, like you would get an orchestra, it would more likely be a melody, probably in treble clef, and then over the melody would be the harmonies, just which would be like the letters, the chords, so that rhythm section players could know how to play their part based on those chords, and obviously maybe these lead players would use that for improvising to know where the harmonies are going. And I could do a whole other thing about lead sheets and good ones and bad ones. But to answer your question, it depends. And so let's take what's a song that'll have two different. You guys know "The Song Is Ended" by Irving Berlin? Yeah, see, someone knows that. The Trailblazers fan knows it. I heard your team's getting bought. But anyways, that's off the topic. That's on my sports channel show, which is next after this. So this the song is ended. The song is ended, but the melody lingers on. You and the song are gone, but the melody lingers on. So did I sing the lyrics right? I don't even know. But basically, the first 4 bars of that, the song is ended, but the melody lingers on. This first 4 bars, yes. Song is ended, but the melody lingers on. Is a C, a C7, an F, and an F minor.
Right.
This would be great if the board was here, but it's not. So, but it's not. So we're going to do it by ear, and we're going to do our best. It's a cool way to learn stuff. So the C. So if I was playing, let's say there's a whole band playing. There's a guitar player playing, tenor guitar player knows all the chords, singer, trumpet player, just making that up. I could play. So the first bar is C. The second bar is C7,
Right.
which is a C chord with a dominant 7. The third bar is F major, and the fourth bar is F minor. So I could play it like this, and I'm going to sing the melody so it sounds like music, but I'm going to say the name of the chords I'm playing.
Right.
C, C7, and F, F minor. So what I did right there is for the C and the C7, I played the 1 and the 5, the C and the G. Typical bass line, bluegrassy bass line, we've all heard and played a million times, right? And I didn't change anything, right?
Right.
Hopefully, the guitar player switches from a C to a C7 to get that sound.
Right.
And hopefully, after we switch to the F, somebody switches from an F to an F minor. I mean, one thing to interesting notes, song is ended, but the melody lingers on. There's no B flat, which makes the C, which in the melody, and there's no A flat, which is in the melody either. It's just kind of a diatonic melody. But if I was playing a walking bass line, I might do that. I might go, the song is ended, but the melody lingers on. So what I did is I played C, but then I hit this, and then I played melody. I put a third in, and then put the minor third in. That might be a lot, but what I'm trying to describe is how, depending on the notes I played. So then take this one further. You could actually play a bass line. You have to be careful of it, or but you try stuff. You could play a bass line, and for a more basic bass line, but use those notes that really color the sound more.
Right.
So this is, instead of going, song is ended, but the melody lingers on. Check this out, Song is ended, but the melody lingers on. So what I did there is I played the C for the C chord. When it came to the C7, I just played the B flat.
Right.
And then when it came time for the F chord, I played the third of the F chord, the A, and then when it came time to play the F minor, I played the minor third. Now this is not, I didn't invent doing that
Yeah, right.
or anything, and it's a common line when that chord progression comes up. Improvisers, people like following.
But the reason I asked that is because I find myself when I'm playing and I play in a 12-piece group, and a lot of times I have to pick up on the bass for the change. If something goes screwy, and it does, then I'm always picking up on the bass, and I'm looking, and I can really hear the basic changes. I can't hear the C to the C7 change, but I can hear the C to the F change, for example, in your example.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you're doing that, because it's really distinct when it goes to a different chord, but the subsets of and the sevenths and the minors and the
Yeah, but if I'm going C, C6, C7, C minor 7,
yeah.
C diminished, and they all sound different. But
Right.
this is where I'm really spelling out
But
the
you-
chord.
Right, you're
So-
actually playing the whole chord out. I mean, you're really walking that.
Yeah, so it just depends. And sometimes when I walk, I'm not.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just depends. It's just a decision you have to make, either subconsciously or consciously, while you're playing, when you're playing off the lead sheet.
Right.
But I think so the answer to your question is it depends. Sometimes when the band's playing, it makes perfect sense just to play the 1 and the 5.
Right.
Sometimes it's super exciting and proper and cool to put in a color tone
Right.
and something from the chord on the bass, and it really does make it really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you go to that note and it doesn't sound good at all. It just depends. Sometimes you're
Right.
only playing with one other person.
That's right.
So when it goes to the minor chord, what if that one other person is a single string player or a clarinet player?
Yeah.
You need to outline the chords more. There's so many different situations I couldn't even begin to describe them. But it's a great question, and so it's like it just sort of depends. I think the most important, the kind of music we're sort of talking about right here, is there's nothing you should do. There's no note you can play that is more important than playing in really good rhythm.
Oh, yeah.
So that, like, if you're playing, I mean, it's why some fancy jazz bass player sounds terrible on the bluegrass gig. If you're playing Song Is Ended,
Yeah.
if this is solid, band's gonna love you. That's what they want to hear.
That's right.
If it's in tune and right in time, then but if you're playing all these weird notes, but they can't follow it, and the
Yeah.
time is going woo woo, then
Right. Well, there's no doubt that the timing is the key to that.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that you hit on that important, as far as the solid bass line enhances what the
Yeah.
other musicians can do.
Yeah, and sometimes, like that line, song is ended, but it's really cool. Like if I play the song is ended,
Yeah.
I like to put that in eventually somewhere. I try to see, like, where is it going to fit? Where is it, or listen, like, the guitar player's already doing it, so me doing it isn't contributing the richness, it's just sort of doubling
Right.
something. There's all these situations.
And I think too that you'll find that if you're playing a tenor guitar or banjo or something, and you don't have a bass, try it with the bass, try it without the bass, and all of a sudden you'll feel like you're naked. You don't have the bass. It really fills that underside of it. It really makes a big difference. Playing with a bass is really.
I was trying to convince
so-
my son he needs to be a bass guitarist because he'll be invited into every band.
That's right.
Yeah, I will say that if you're a bass player, you play a lot of music, right?
Yes.
It's a huge component of any group. I mean, it really makes the difference.